Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good lunch period right now. So let's get everything set up. We'll get started pretty soon. Just need to get this set up. All right, get the screen share set up, get the chat bar set up so I can see. All right, everybody, it's about time to get started. Again, I hope you're having a wonderful lunch. Grab your sandwich, grab your pasta, grab your soup, whatever you have for lunch if you have it. Right now, I've got a cup of coffee with me, and let's have a good time learning about how to confidently present the qualitative results chapter of your dissertation. I am Dr. Joanna Broussard. I am a qualitative mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full dissertation service company that helps with editing and advice and guidance from start all the way through the presentation of your final results. If you've got a problem, we've got someone or someones who can help you. We'll be talking more about that later on, and I will be talking about some of the clients I've helped in general terms throughout the presentation while giving you some advice. I have the chat up, so you are free to ask questions if you have them during the chat, because I find that that will help later when you receive the recording. Yes, this is being recorded, and you will receive a complimentary copy of that recording. If you ask the questions, and I can give you the answer as it happens, as it's connected to the topic we're talking about. That is one way in which you can help. It helps with the learning and it helps reinforce the information. But you can also use the Q&A, but recognize I will be answering questions orally. I will not be writing out the answers, that way we can keep going. The results chapter is a pretty big and detailed chapter, and there's a lot of information to cover. So let's get started. So we need to think first about the components that go into the qualitative results chapter, and we're going to talk about each one of these individually, from the introduction through the setting, the demographics, data collection, data analysis, the actual results presentation itself, talking about trustworthiness, and then the summary. Think back to undergraduate composition courses. Anytime you were talking about writing, you were taught about writing an academic essay, you had three main sections: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. I'm sure you can see the introduction and the summary fill out the first and the last. Everything from setting through trustworthiness, that is your body. The introduction, you tell people what you're going to tell them. You get them excited for what you're going to present in the body. The body, you present all of the information you have in all of the detail you can. And then the summary, you give them a rundown of what you just told them, and then you smooth transition into the next. That is the best and simplest overview that I can give right now, but we will be going over each section, each subsection in detail. But think about as you plan your chapter, this is what the three main sections need to be doing. And that's why I like to start with it. So that way you can get a sort of just a general reminder of, well, this is what I have to do here. Then I do this, and then I do it again in this way to set up what comes next. So let's talk about the introduction first. You're going to be doing three things in the introduction. You're going to be restating the problem that you're addressing and the purpose of your study. You've already addressed this in your introduction chapter. You've addressed it at the beginning of your lit review chapter. You've addressed it at the beginning of your method chapter as well. This is to remind the audience, remind the reader of why you're doing this. And remember that your purpose should be worded the same way, verbatim, with each chapter. So what is the purpose? What problem are we addressing? This is hey, just remember, this is why we're doing this study. This is why this has happened. Then remind your readers of your research questions. Often this is simply done by listing RQ1, RQ2, RQ3, however many research questions you have, one right after the other. This will be a copy and paste of any time you presented them earlier, so that way the wording is consistent. And once you've done that, you will preview the chapter by going over the sections that are to come and giving a little bit of detail. You don't want to just list, I will talk about the setting, the demographics, data collection, data analysis, results, and then provide a summary. You want to sort of take what you're going to do in each of those sections and give a little bit of a detailed preview. Your preview could easily be almost a full paragraph in itself, where you give, hey, in this, I will describe the physical setting of the interview and talk about some of the interesting things that happened. I will describe the process of data collection and describe anomalies or complications. I will present the results by research question as they relate to each individual research question in order, or I will present the results from the thematic analysis in a way that tells a chronological narrative, or that makes a logical narrative that makes it easy to understand the significance of the findings. Be brief, but give us something that we can chew on to make us excited to move forward in this preview. Now, as we move from the introduction to the body, let's talk about the setting. So, where did you conduct your research? Why did you choose to conduct it here? This is often when you're doing some sort of research in a physical setting, participant observation, simple observations, but more in general, when you're looking at where I conducted my study looking at this particular phenomenon with this population in this location. Well, why did you choose that? Why is that location the setting? It can be as simple as geographical proximity to the data collection site. It can be something, maybe you have some sort of a connection to that population. Are you a member of the community? Or if your research setting is the company you work for, well, because I work for this company, I have access to the company with ease to perform the observations, to interview the people. This is where you discuss why you chose to conduct the research in this setting. Now you'll move and talk about some of the conditions that influenced your research. Why you chose to do this, but also think about, well, because using the I work for this company, this is where you'll mention, because I am a supervisor at this company, I made certain to not interview any people who were directly underneath me to avoid a conflict of interest. You could also talk about something like, COVID, influenced the research by necessitating either moving fully virtual or having at least 6-foot separation between me and my interview participants. Maybe it forced us to change some of how we handle observations. I've got a lot of friends from grad school who are anthropologists and folklorists who study festivals. And so things like COVID or weather, these are things that influence how their research went about at the setting. Festivals tend to be outdoors. If it's raining on the day of the festival, either you move it indoors or you cope with the rain or you cancel, and that changes things. And that may be something that influences your research that you'll need to talk about here, because it helps paint the picture of the process of conducting the research, and that can have an influence on your findings that will need to be discussed either in this chapter or in the discussion chapter, because that can impact your interpretation. If a festival is normally outdoors, but it had to be moved indoors because of inclement weather, you may not have the same results as if it were conducted outdoors. These are things to recognize. And similarly, any conditions that influenced your participants. Could be the weather, it could be fears of COVID or of other infections. Maybe one of your participants had a migraine but agreed to participate anyway. Maybe you'll talk about getting to the interview site was a problem because of car trouble or traffic, or they got called into work, or maybe they had a sick child that they had to figure out how to take care of while still getting to the interview site, or any number of things. I'd love to give more specifics, but it becomes harder to give specifics as this can be a very general and broad. I don't know what could influence a particular participant until it happens. But these are things we mention because, again, these are things that can have an impact on the interpretation of the results as well as the data that you collect. Okay, there's a question here. Anything that might have impacted, should that not be included in the limitations? Yes and no, because in the limitations, you can only put what you think will impact, and you can go back and change it, but you don't always know what's going to happen. A lot of times the limitations happens in chapter 3, is written in chapter 3. And well, chapter 3 is often written before you've conducted the research. And why should you include, and so you can go back and edit chapter 3, yes, but why should you include it here? Remember short-term memory. You can only hold about 7 things in the short-term memory, and it's good to put it here for short-term recall, and because the limitations these things will have a direct impact on your results. And so putting it here is like, look, I've talked about it. I mean, think about how much at the beginning of each chapter is repeated. You've got your purpose, you've got your problem, you've got your research questions. All of that is repeated each chapter. Well, now that we know what the limitations are, we can connect them directly to the results by including them here. Nothing in a dissertation is ever going to be, I've mentioned it once and I don't have to say it again. Academic writing, as I talked about when we looked at the sections, in the introduction, you tell people what you're going to tell them. In the body, you tell them what you want to tell them in more detail. And in the conclusion, you tell them what you just told them. It's what's called the syllogistic form. And we repeat these things because repetition helps people remember, helps people connect. And so by putting it here, in addition to where we talked about the limitations, we help make those connections move from short-term to long-term so that the reader sees their significance. Academic writing is a matter of repeating, so that way people remember. And so keep that in mind. I hope that answers your question, because we will be talking about a lot of things that, well, can they go elsewhere? Yes, but we put them in multiple places so that way they make sense and that they stay in the reader's minds. Anything you want the reader to keep in mind, you need to keep suggesting it either overtly or covertly, so that way it's there. And because you are presenting the results, anything that could have an impact on them needs to be in the results chapter. Heck, maybe you got sick and had to conduct interviews or focus groups or observations with a migraine. Sometimes you can put off those things with a migraine, sometimes you can't. And so this is where you'll talk about that, because that impacted the results, but wasn't a limitation. Because you can't always predict when these things happen. And that's why we include it here. So let's talk about, moving on from there, we'll talk about the demographics. We'll talk about, this is going to be a simple section. This is often a section that you can write really quickly as you're thinking about it, as you think about writing. You'll need to do three big things. You'll need to have some information about your participants that is both general and specific. You want to give a good general picture of the participants, of the demographics of your population, and then specifically the sample of that population that you drew for the study. You'll talk about the characteristics that are relevant to that study, and you'll present maybe some sketches of your participants with enough vagueness to maintain their confidentiality. You want to present, and you'll want this to be detailed so people can replicate, but you want to keep it vague enough so that way no one can single out any individual participant and go, I know who that is. Yeah, it's not an easy line to walk. It's a challenge, and it takes practice. And so this is something you'll probably present. One, you will present it in paragraph form, but you may also have a table. Some disciplines and some schools want you to have a demographic table, some don't. So always check with the template that your school has if they have one. And if not, ask your chair what your chair thinks is appropriate. But this is the type of section that might be something like, for this study, I looked at teachers who taught English to non-native speakers at public middle schools in the San Benedito School District, at districts in San Benedito County in southern Texas. And I think I'm making up a county. I do not know the counties of Texas, but I'm trying to give you, that would be your population. For this study, I interviewed 12, I drew a sample of 12 English ESL teachers who had at least 3 years of experience teaching in this county. All participants range between the ages of 30 and 55. Of the participants, 60% were, or more than likely would be 70% were identified as female, 30% identified as male, 60% identified as white, 30% identified as Black, 5% identified as Latino, Latina, and 5% identified as Asian Pacific Islander. Okay, we have a question. Keeping participant information confidential may it also lead to fake research data? How do we deal with this? Keeping participant information. Okay, so let's start with the opposite. We know first of all that to get to this point, we have had to pass an IRB review process. And if we do not keep patient information confidential, we're not going to pass that. So not being confidential is not an option. So first off, I want to make sure we're all clear on that. But even if you don't keep it confidential, unless you are presenting video and audio in support of the data of your findings, it becomes a challenge to know if this is actually what someone said. How do we do that? That's something that's very simple, and that's we keep documentation. We keep a record of everything. One thing that that was probably discussed in, and we'll get to that with data collection and data storage, it's often discussed in the credibility section. All data, it must be kept for a period of 3 to 5 years is the usual thing. It's kept in a locked filing cabinet. So that way, usually it's to prevent our participants from having any negative impacts, any negative repercussions, so they will speak honestly. But it's also, if someone questions it, the transcripts, the audio files, the video can then be reviewed. It happened once to someone at my university when I was getting my PhD. There was a question, and the IRB wanted to review audio files. That exonerated them of a claim of fake data. Can anything ever be certain? Possibly not, but we operate on good faith. That's why when we get to trustworthiness, we will be talking in detail about credibility and how we establish that. If there is a lack of trust, then it doesn't matter if the research is done well. But if we don't have confidential data, if our participants don't have the confidence that they will not be identified, outed, put in a position where their participation could get them in trouble, then we become unlikely to get meaningful, actual, or good data. Participant confidentiality is not about giving us the freedom to say anything. It is about protecting our participants from negative repercussions that could happen. If they say something that maybe puts their company in a bad light, if they say something that maybe they admit to criminal behavior, maybe they admit to something that could damage a family or a romantic relationship. There are lots of things that can happen with participants that confidentiality helps them feel that they can trust the person. Maybe they're part of a marginalized community who has not fared so well at the hands of any institution that has major cultural capital, academia, the police, the government. And so maybe they're hesitant to speak because they're afraid it could get their community in trouble. And so these are things to think about. But the concern should not be about, well, maybe the data is fake. The concern should always be, protecting our participants, because when doing qualitative data, without them, we don't have research. And so that's why we have to worry about maintaining their confidentiality. We don't want to identify, and sometimes you don't always know what will cause trouble. Something that they felt was innocuous, that you feel was innocuous. Maybe an administrator doesn't like them talking about policy. I used to be a teacher. Even if you were telling the truth, administrators didn't like it when you said that policy was ineffective or that policy actually hurt students. And so confidentiality helps with that. That's why we have to keep our demographic sketches specific enough so that someone can see the transferability to another demographic that's similar, but vague enough so that way it doesn't put participants in a situation where someone can identify what they said. This is often where you might start to, you may even begin discussing things like pseudonyms or for participants, or maybe you will redact names of schools or companies, or maybe you'll give schools and companies pseudonyms as well. These are things that you might want to start previewing so you can go into detail later in a way that will make sense. Again, you want to preview before you talk in detail, because this way everything is in the minds of the reader and it will make sense to them. Then we talk about our data collection. We've already previewed it in our demographics, but now we can get into a little bit more specific. Number of participants. From what location were they collected? How frequently did we collect data? Maybe you had a sample of 12 to, let's say you had a sample of 15, but you were only able to collect data from 12 that will be in the actual results. Here's where you can explain why that was a discrepancy. Here's where you can talk about, I got this from this location. Maybe if you're looking at school, as I mentioned already, schools in a school district, maybe you're drawing data from 3 different schools. So X number of participants from school 1, Y number of participants from school 2, Z number of participants from school 3. How frequent were your data collection events? This is where you'll talk more about, hey, remember I said I was going to do one-on-one interviews? Well, I've had this many interviews. You can talk about follow-up interviews that you did at a later date, how many of those you did, how long the interviews were, 40 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. Did you do focus groups? Well, how many focus group sessions did you do? How long were the focus group sessions? Were they face-to-face? Were they virtual? Were they hybrid? These are things to mention in your data collection. How did you record the data? Was it done with an audio recorder on your phone? Separate, like audio tape recorder or a digital audio recorder? A laptop? Did you use Zoom, Skype, Teams, FaceTime? If you're doing observations, whether they be participant or non-participant, did you video record? How did you video record? Cell phone, camcorder, laptop, webcam? Talk about all of that. Were there any variations from the plan that you presented in your methods chapter? This is where you go, look, hey, in the methods, I said I was going to do this. This happened instead, and here's why. You talk about the differences. You explain what the differences were. You know, I was going to do at this outdoor festival, but hey, as I've said earlier, it rained. The festival was moved inside. And so things had to change. Or I took ill and couldn't make the interview session face-to-face for this participant or these participants. So, but they were willing to work with me and we conducted virtual interviews. You said the methods chapter is the I will do this. Here you are telling well, this is what I did. And if there's a discrepancy, if something caused a change, well, here's what changed, here's why. Maybe this is also where you can say, hey, I drew a sample of 15. I did interview 15. However, I only have 12 participants in the data listed because 3 participants requested that their data be removed from the study. And so to honor that request, I have removed their data. They will not be discussed in this section or in the final results. So that is a variation. That's something that is unusual that happened in data collection. Maybe this is where you can also talk about things like I was conducting observations at a school and we had a fire drill in the middle of the class I was observing. And so that alters data collection in a way that you could not foresee in your limitation. It's a fact of, especially in America, this is something, I haven't really talked about this in webinars and I'm not going to talk about it beyond mentioning it here, but when I was a teacher, the last few years, we had active shooter drills. I was in an active shooter lockdown at one point. That is something you cannot foresee happening. That is unusual. That if someone were observing my classroom, that would definitely change the data that they collected in a way that they could not have foreseen. So this is where you talk about that. And sometimes you can go back and you can have another chance to collect data in another situation, but depending on your deadlines, depending on IRB proposal, depending on other factors, going back after an anomaly has impacted your data may not always be possible. And so that's something to think about. And so, but this is where you can talk about that. So that way everyone knows what happened in a way that's meaningful. Now you've talked about collecting the data. Well, once you've got the data, what do you do with it, right? You got to analyze it. So the next section is going to talk about the actual process. In chapter 3, you probably had a DAP, a data analysis plan. This is what I'm going to do. However, this isn't going to just be a repeat. You're going to take the steps you said you would follow. You're going to then talk about them in greater detail. How did you analyze the data? Each source, each type. How did you code it? And normally we talk about coding because in qualitative analysis, you're probably going to be coding some type of data. Observation, document, interview, transcript, focus group transcript, all of the above. How did you move it from codes to categories to themes? Or if you're doing phenomenological analysis, how did you arrive at the essence of the experience and the phenomenon? You'll describe and define the codes and the categories you identified as you generated the data analysis, and you'll identify and describe any discrepant or negative cases and where they fit in. Now let's talk about this. This is what you've got to do. So if you're familiar with Braun and Clark, they have one of the simplest ways to do this. So how did I analyze my data? Well, using the Braun and Clark 6-stage method of thematic analysis, I began by familiarizing myself with my data transcripts. Once the data was transcribed, I read over the transcript, each transcript 2 to 3 times to sort of get a sense of the content and begin thinking about some of the categories that were of discussion. I then uploaded that data to NVivo, MaxQDA, whatever, to facilitate data management and coding. Then, as I went through the codes, identifying snippets of data that provided elements of meaning. Anytime multiple people talked about the same thing, it went in the same code. When I finished going through all the transcripts, I had 87 codes. Then I looked over my codes, reviewed them. I saw that some codes were really, really broad and could be split up into meaningful bits of data, but others were really, really narrow in a way that hindered finding meaning. And so I grouped those together. This led to a final code count of 78. From there, I grouped them into categories, larger units of meaning based on similarities of the topics in the codes. And this resulted in 28 categories. Then I moved into grouping those categories into themes, the biggest units of meaning that can be made from the data. And that resulted in 6 themes. So, and however many themes you have, but this is how and then from there, I refined the themes. I made sure I made the names short and simple, but still descriptive. And then I generated the report. So that's how you'll be describing. And then the definition for the defining your codes and your categories. This is something that you might have a table for. Depending on how many codes you have, this table will either go here or as an appendix. Some schools and some fields only want a list of the codes in your code book. Others do want a definition of what was contained in each code. So be sure to check on that, because some of the clients I've had have had between 150, 180. I think the largest client I had came to me with a code book with 447 codes. And if you have to go back and define each one of those codes at the end, that's time consuming, that's tedious, and it's not going to make you very happy. If you have to do that, it's going to be frustrating and boring. So do it as you go, so that way it's done and you're ready for this if you need it. It's better to have more information than you need and cut things out than to have less and have to go back and figure out how to put things together later. And now let's talk about negative cases. These are the ones that don't match the expectations you have for the data. What do you do with them? These are your anomalies, your outliers. In qualitative data, these are some of the most interesting cases, and you don't want to just throw it out. Where do they fit into the analysis? An example I had from a friend's research, she was looking at second-generation immigrants, and sort of the general set of research that we had at the time was, by second generation, there's a significant loss of quote-unquote culture. They tend to begin really assimilating. And so second-generation immigrants often have 1 or 2 traditions, and I think it was their food customs, but language loss by second generation is a big deal. And so she was talking to her participants and interviewing them. She came across he was an Italian-American immigrant, but he did not experience this culture loss that the research suggested. In fact, he seemed more in tune with his culture than anyone else that she had observed. So this was a case where the opposite was happening. And as she went through, she did what most people do at this point, which is you figure out a reason how this negative case fits into your analysis. For her, what she noted was one thing he mentioned that no one else did. His father died when he was young, and he had to step up and become sort of the de facto patriarch of the family, taking care of his siblings, helping his mother with income. And so because of that, he sort of developed he seemed to, at least by the analysis she was able to conduct at this time, he seemed to develop a stronger connection to his Italian culture because he had to be the sort of the transmitter of tradition to the family. And so that sort of helped move in a different direction. One thing she mentioned in her discussion chapter was this was the only time she found this in her interviews, but it is something that warrants further research to see if it was in fact the having to step up into a matriarchal parental role at an early age played a result in keeping the culture alive. So you'll talk about this, you'll let people know that this is there because it is something that impacts the results. Negative cases should not be something that you're afraid of. They provide and they show the richness of the human experience. Sometimes the data you think you're going to collect is not the data you get. Sometimes the literature, where especially if it's people who are not part of a group, a culture group, whether that be Italian American immigrants, teachers, first generation college students. Sometimes if the literature is produced by people who are outside of the group they are studying, they can only interpret from an outsider's perspective. And so it doesn't always reflect the experiences of the people in the culture group. So this is why negative, discrepant cases, they can be frustrating, I will admit that, but they can really show the richness of data and just why working with qualitative data can be super rewarding. You really get to see how people live and experience life and certain phenomena and how they think about things. And it's super engaging. If you're struggling with your data, being engaging, negative cases can give you a puzzle. So think about that and keep that in mind. Now you'll present your results. This is the bulk of the chapter. This is what everyone came to this chapter for. We've said all of that before, from the introduction up through data analysis, was setting the scene. This is helping give your reader a picture of what led up to the data that you actually are presenting and the results that you have found. You've talked about what you're going to present. Now it's time to present it. So how do we organize our results? And there are a couple of big ways, as you can see here. The two most common, you can organize by research question. If you have multiple research questions, these themes that I found answer research question 1. These themes answer research question 2. These, and so on and so forth. That can be a meaningful way to present the data. It's a very common, it's very, very popular. But you can also go by category or theme. With a thematic analysis, you should not feel limited to go RQ1, RQ2, RQ3. I'll give you an example. I just finished working with a client who was looking at people who participated in a particular rehabilitation program after they had experienced a major heart attack. And this client had 2 research questions, one that dealt with the initial stages, and one that dealt with at the end of the program and how their and life changed. Well, that's two good things to think about and two important pieces of data to collect. However, when we looked at the data that they collected and the thematic analysis that they approved and that they saw was reflective of the data of the interviews that they had, only 20% of the data responded to RQ1 and 80% responded to RQ2. That looks wildly unbalanced, and that's something that could give people pause and question whether the data was collected properly, whether the right questions were asked, whether something went wrong or was done incorrectly. However, when looking at the thematic analysis, what emerged was a very descriptive narrative from the initial response of what were your feelings like when you received the diagnosis, to what, once you get the diagnosis, what did you do? Okay, you looked for new information, describing the process of finding new information, describing the feelings of being admitted for the study, all the way through the process of keeping motivated, and then what were your thoughts after completing this rehabilitation program? Vivek, this is very achievable. This is something you can do. It's kind of scary. It's kind of daunting, but it is something that you can achieve. And we'll talk more about how to make this even more manageable in just a little bit. But as I was saying, instead of going RQ1, RQ2, showing the narrative, presenting the themes in a way that gave a narrative from the fear and the heartbreak and the terror of diagnosis of, you had a major heart attack, you came close to dying, to the process of learning, of starting a program, of staying motivated, of making change, of continuing the change after. Presenting the themes in that order, it made it for a narrative that was engaging, that was powerful, that accurately presented the results, but did so in a way that helped get not just the findings across, but the significance across, without having to say, this is why this was significant, because it told the story of the movement. And so these are things that you can think about. Going by research question, super, super common. It's often easy, it's clear. But if the themes tell a narrative in a particular order, that can be a more powerful rhetorical device for structuring the results section. And now, as you're presenting this data, keep this in mind. Most of this in your results should be your own words, but you should be presenting this as you would talk to someone. But like any good research document, you will use supporting evidence. You are making the claims, and the evidence that you will provide, the quotes from your participants, excerpts from documents, photographs from your observations. These will be the evidence that justifies the grounds that you are using to make the claims that you are making about, this is the data that I gathered. You'll discuss the data. Remember, never end a paragraph on a quote. Always have a summary, a concluding sentence that moves on to the next topic. And you may do some minor interpretation if it's appropriate for your field, for your department, or your school. Always ask your chair. And again, this should be logical and clear to the reader. as I've told students and then clients countless times, you need to, it's not condescending to hold your reader's hand and go step by step. You have done all of this work. Your reader, they're intelligent, but they haven't done everything you've done. They don't have the intimate connection to the data and the results that you do. So take them step by step, guide them, so that way when you get to your summary and when you get to the results chapter, everything that you say there will make sense. You want them to see how you went from your ideas to your conclusions. The claims you make need to be supported with enough evidence to suggest that this is the most accurate and the best way to interpret the data. Not always the only way, but the best way to interpret the data that you were able to gather given the situation. So think about how you will present everything logically, how you will make your case, because this is what you were doing in this chapter. And then you do need to think about discussing your discrepant cases. Well, not everything conforms to the data. Sometimes there's someone who's wildly different. Not just that someone has a difference of opinion on one or two things, but maybe their experience was wildly different. Why? Discrepant cases can suggest alternative explanations. They can illustrate variations of experience. You know, maybe it's because someone was ostracized, like if you do something with family dynamics, maybe someone was ostracized from the family for being left-handed, for not achieving good grades in school, not going into the family business, for loving who they love, whether it, maybe they love the quote-unquote wrong person. So their experience of being part of a family might be wildly different. So that can be a variation in experience. And you should discuss this in the context of the theme that it relates to, in the context of the category. Maybe most people said X, but you did have this one person who had a very descriptive different negative experience. 87%, 90% of my respondents said that coffee is the best thing to drink in the morning. One person despised coffee and gave a 20-minute explanation as to why they despised coffee and why fresh squeezed blood orange juice was the best morning beverage. So, give it that context. And I'm using some somewhat silly examples at times because those are things that I found students really remember, and it helps illustrate the differences. So discuss discrepancies and negative cases in the context in which it is meaningful. And then you can think about visual findings. Tables. You're probably not going to have a lot of tables. Usually the only table you'll have in a qualitative results will be a code book, maybe sort of a table showing how you went from codes to themes. That's usually going to be it in terms of what tables you have. Figures, maybe you've got photographs or scans of document sections. If you're doing work on a language that has a wildly different alphabet, maybe you're going to have a table or a figure that shows that language's alphabet to the alphabet that you were using to write the dissertation, maybe connecting it to the International Phonetic Alphabet. So that way, any reader who would pick it up and has a knowledge of linguistics can understand the phonology. Maps, drawings, these are things that you may or may not have depending upon your situation. but you place those where they are appropriate, and you must also describe them. Don't just have a photograph and not tell people in the text, in the body, what's in the photograph. Provide a description so that we understand as readers what it is that we are looking at and why it was important to be included as evidence of what's going on in your results. Remember, your goal should be to make everything clear that is in your understanding of the data that you've worked with to a reader who may understand what research is, they may understand your framework, they may understand your methodology, but they did not conduct this research. Maybe they did something similar, but they didn't research this population or this particular phenomenon, but a similar one. Help them understand as clear as you can. And now let's talk about trustworthiness. This is a big deal because if the data isn't trustworthy, it doesn't matter what the findings are. So we'll break this down really quickly. We have several blogs on our website. This could be an entire webinar on trustworthiness if necessary. Credibility. Do your readers find confidence in the accuracy of your findings? That's why we go step by step. That's why we basically show our work from coding through thematic analysis. Maybe you will have your transcripts and your code book in the appendices, so that way everything can be checked. This is why we have a literature review where we show that we understand what we're doing. This is why we pass IRB approval, because that way exterior individuals will then vet and say, yep, this research is going to be probably going to be credible and good. So we can also triangulate our interview data, document analysis, observations. Maybe does the research jive with similar pieces of literature? Does it pass the vibe check, as kids these days say? So you'll be talking about this. Transferability. Because qualitative research can be very specific, how well you describe the phenomenon that you have studied, the demographics, the setting, how well you've described all of this can help someone see just how much your findings may be transferable to a similar phenomenon in a different context. Maybe small town Mardi Gras in Louisiana, small town Mardi Gras in Alabama, small town Carnival in a South American country. How much description of the proceedings, of the phenomenon, of the meaning, that can help people see how transferable this is. That's something you should be looking for in the literature you review for your lit review, because there may not be a lot of data and a lot of research on your particular phenomenon, but there may be similar phenomenon that people have studied, or maybe the same thing, but with a different population, a different demographic, a different culture. Being aware of how transferable and how big those differences can be can help with establishing the trustworthiness, which is why we talk about thick, rich descriptions. Dependability. How consistent are your findings in the replication of the information and the description? So this is why we need to make sure that we have these good details. We have an audit trail where we have gone through step by step and everything is documented. That's often going to be in the appendix. You can discuss it in the chapter, but you'll probably place a lot of these documents in the appendices. And it dovetails with confirmability. How neutral were you, and how much are the findings based on the participants? And to go back to dependability and confirmability, this is why we do things like member checking. Once you have transcribed the data and from the interviews, are you getting your participants a chance to look over it? Does this reflect what you said? Is this what you said? Am I presenting your words accurately in a way that you feel represents what you said and how you said it? Do you give them a chance to review? Does that require making changes? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And if you did make changes, this is where you would talk about that. After you do your thematic analysis, do you discuss it with your participants to see if that seems reflective of their experience? If they say yes, check. If not, how does this, you may have to go back and change some things. So if you want to make sure that you are presenting findings that are based on your participants. Qualitative data is a lot of work, but it produces some of the most amazing, interesting, and meaningful results. And this is the section where you'll be talking about all of this in specifics. You want to be detailed so that way your reader knows, okay, not only does this person understand trustworthiness in research, but they have made a good faith effort to do everything they can above board with the participants front and center in their mind and honestly. So this is where you will show that to your reader. And then we have the summary. Provide some highlights. This is where you will again tell your reader what you just told them. Give us the highlight reel of your results chapter. Paint a picture of what you found, and then transition to what's going to be your discussion and give a brief preview of what you're going to be talking about in the discussion, because that is where you can really get a chance to dig into the meaning of what you found. Oftentimes, this is where you're presenting the findings, and then next you'll dig into what it really means and some of the really, really, really interesting things that came about through the analysis in the study that you have done. So get the reader excited to continue. And, well, where do I start? When you're writing the chapter, you don't have to start at the beginning. Some people, and I will be honest, myself included, I am one who has to start at the beginning and go all the way through, or it feels weird. But you don't have to. You can start small, you can start big. I often advise clients, if you're uncertain, start with some of the smaller sections, like, say, the demographics, the setting. These are the low-hanging fruit, the ones that don't take very long to draft. Get those done, get that checked off, get that dopamine boost for, hey, I've got this, I've got these sections done. And then start working on the bigger sections, the more time-consuming sections. Rewriting and brainstorming, sometimes if you're stuck, just writing down your thoughts in a stream of consciousness free form is a way to take off the terror of the blank page. Remember, and I'm going to use fiction writer Neil Gaiman as my example, because Neil Gaiman in a class he gave for the masterclass program said, in the first draft, you get the events of your story down on the page. In the second draft, you make it look like you knew what you were doing the whole time. So same thing for your dissertation. The first draft, you get all the information on the page. Then in the revisions, the second draft, you put it together in a way that conveys the meaning that emerged from your research. And then don't think you have to sit for 4, 6, 8 hours a day to write. 15 minutes a day, an hour a day, a paragraph a day. If you've got time, sure, spend some time writing, but a little bit of progress every day helps you see the light at the end of the tunnel more efficiently than binge and purge writing. Then I write for 8 hours one day and then nothing for a week. Don't feel, I know a lot of programs will tell you, write all the time. You should always be writing. Take breaks, relax, give your brain a chance to sort of clear itself out. We don't have time to talk about self-care, but self-care is important. So don't neglect self-care. You are a person, and if you're a person with the need to rest, you deserve rest. So don't feel that you have to put aside rest and self-care. You deserve it. Take some time to rest at the end of the day. If you've had a long day at work, don't start working on your dissertation the first day you get home. Take some time to chill, have a cup of coffee, have a cup of tea, hug a pet, spend some time with your family, watch your favorite television show or comfort movie, listen to music, play your favorite comfort video game. Do something that helps you relax, and then switch to writing. Give your brain a chance to rest. Your body and your mind deserve it. Oh, and before I forget, remember, Statistics Solutions is a full-service dissertation consulting company providing graduate students timely editorial support for their dissertations and other scholarly projects. We help with other studies, and we do help with writing journal articles. So we can help you from start to finish. Any aspects you need help with, we can help with that. For information about our services, you can receive a free 30-minute consultation Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern United States time. Please contact Janine Glace at info@statisticsolutions.com, or you can call the phone number there, 877-437-8622. For those outside the United States, the country code is 1. Dankeschön, Jacqueline. I'm glad you enjoyed it. As a reminder, you will be getting a recorded copy of this webinar within the next few days so that you will have a copy of the video and the audio that you can then listen to as you need. But please, if you need help, we are available to help. We love to help. We're very good at helping people. So if you find you need help, don't hesitate to give us a call. Remember, you can get a complimentary consultation regarding our services through the email and the phone number at the end of this webinar. It is 12:06. I will hold up the floor for 1 or 2 questions. If you have questions, you can type them in chat or pop them into the Q&A, as others have done. Okay, Marvin, you're in your first year. Congratulations on starting your doctoral journey. It is a journey that can be frustrating, but it's rewarding. And trust me, I think all of you can do this. I have faith that all of you can. Don't get discouraged, because we are here to help. And that is true, Marvin. Knowing that there are resources available is a good way to reduce the anxiety. And remember, your school may have other resources that can help you. And don't forget, rest, physical health care, mental health care, get some exercise. If you need to speak to a therapist, it is a wonderful thing that will help you get through this process, because it is something that can feel isolating. It can induce anxiety. And so, and these are two of the biggest reasons why people don't finish. But we are here to help. Others are there or can help you as well. Family, friends. But again, we are a full service dissertation consulting company. We have reasonable turnarounds for editorial support. We can help with interpreting share feedback because not every academic speaks normal people talk. A lot of us were trained to speak academic, and that's the only language we know. But we can help you interpret academic speak. And so, as a result, we are here to help. We are happy that we love to help. But it is 12:09 p.m. for me. It is lunchtime. I have kept you long enough. Thank you for coming. I wish you all the best success, both in your educational journey and in your personal life journey. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.